something, so you can see this is a really big anomaly. Anyway, we wanted to have Dr. McPherson come, or Guy come, because we believe that he is on the right track at connecting the dots. And we just wanted to give people the opportunity to basically make up your own minds about what you think about this idea, kind of come from that back 40 direction, kind of shake things up, challenge your thinking. And we very much appreciate you coming. There'll be a question and answer for Guy, and if you have any questions about hairs, I'll be happy to answer it after the show is over. But thank you very much for coming. And we do have a donation jar, because Guy doesn't charge. All the donations, 100% will go to him. I know many of you have already contributed, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for the Hairs organization and Guy and Pauline. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. McPherson.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to the people weighing in via live stream from Perth, Australia, Corvallis, Oregon, somewhere in Tennessee, Berkeley, California, Albury, Australia, Ontario, Canada, and New Zealand. So there are about 3 or 4 times as many people watching online as are sitting in this room, which is great. Not to disparage people sitting in this room, since already I'm sitting on tread ice here. Treading on thin ice or thinning on tread ice. Word salad. I want to talk today about what we do and how we live in light of the terminal diagnosis we've all been given. Thank you. Thank you for the sound. And we were given a terminal diagnosis on birth, of course. We all know that birth is a sexually transmitted disease that is proven lethal in every case. You're all going to die. Or as my colleague Stephen Jenkinson says, you know everybody's going to die except you. That's how we act. We all know that everybody's going to die, except maybe it won't affect us. And so we do what everybody else does in this set of living arrangements, in this culture, in this society. We go to school. We then usually go to school some more. And sometimes we go to school some more. And then we get a job and we get married and we have 2.5 children and we work for 35 or 40 years. And then we do the things we want to do. I'm suggesting that we not wait. I am not suggesting inaction by any stretch of the imagination. As Edward Abbey, the desert iconoclastic writer who lived in Tucson for many years, as he indicated, action is the antidote to despair, and elsewhere he wrote, sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul. I am suggesting action that seems right to us in light of the fact that we don't live forever. What shall we do? What do we pursue when our lives are short? In early March of 2015, the world's oldest human being at the time was asked to ponder the first 117 years of her life. And she said, and apparently she didn't have a lot of strength for answering such silly questions, she said, and I quote, "It seemed rather short." To put a punctuation mark on her message, and apparently mine, she died a few weeks later. 117 years old, it seemed rather short. We don't have that long. It will seem rather short. What are you going to do with the time that's left? From a millennial, 25-year-old Serena Raphael in Western Australia comes this message that I am not proposing inaction. In fact, she was one of the most active members, friends of mine that I've never met. She writes me almost every day and tells me how my message has liberated her and has encouraged her to take action. What better judge of our character than how we act in the face of impossible odds? And that's where we're at. We're all going to die. All civilizations go away. All species go extinct. How do we act in light of that terminal diagnosis? And she also points out something really important. Beyond living without fear, living without hope, living without worry, acting anyway, and taking what a Buddhist might call right action. She also points out that millennials can't be expected to fix the mess that our generation and the generations before have created. So let it go. Stop having the university professors tell 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds, you need to fix it. We fouled the air and we dirtied the water and we washed the soil into the oceans. We chopped down every tree on the planet. You need to fix that for us. We enjoyed economic prosperity as a result of destroying every aspect of the living planet, as a result of driving to extinction 200 species every day. You need to fix it. She says, no. No, you can't do that to us. She sent me a story just today via email, 20 minutes before now. And I suspect it will be posted on the blog at guymcpherson.com within the next few days. And it made me cry. The story about how one of her contemporaries in college was being lied to every day by the professors who told her that her generation needs to fix it. And so Serena comes home to her shared home, and her friend is awash in blood and emotion. She knew she'd been lied to. They all do. I want to talk for a little bit about my favorite subject. My favorite subject is not human extinction. I'm not a fan. I'm not promoting human extinction, as I hear every day. My favorite subject, for the most part, is me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's true for all of us, right? There's almost nothing I enjoy more when I was doing this than academic job interviews. Because you go to interview on a college campus, and you meet with everybody in the department, like in groups of 1 and 2. 3 or 4 days, you're just chatting about yourself and how amazing you are. Who doesn't like that? And people are reinforcing it. They're looking at your resume. You did some really good work here. Can you talk about this? Well, sure, I certainly can. Anyway, so I want to give a little background on me and how I came to share this message with people around the world for no external return whatsoever, just for sport, apparently. The first email message I received from Mark Austin, who was an NSA contracted spy, was in June of 2016, just about a year ago. And he indicated and submitted to me heavily redacted documents. I reacted heavily. The documents were redacted. He indicated that I'd been surveilled since 1996 at the University of Arizona when I was 36 years old and didn't even know I was doing anything particularly important, and that he was the NSA contracted spy in my classroom in 2005. And he sent this information because he had just retired from government service, or so he thought. Apparently, it's not optional. I keep hearing myself. You know, some people really like the sound of their own voice, but I find it just a little weird. Mark Austin, if that's his name, indicates that I'm alive because some people more powerful than his cover at the Pentagon think I'm doing important work. They didn't think that for a long time, and that's because I was talking about and modeling anarchism. I was using classroom anarchism as my approach. Anarchism means taking responsibility for yourself and for your neighbors, learning from each other. So in my classrooms, I would just show up with a list of questions. And then Socrates-like, I would just throw questions at them. I gave them all the notes I would be using to teach on the first day of class. So they had everything I had. They could just read ahead 20 minutes before the class started, and they knew everything I knew, except what I had in my head. And so we just had a conversation. So I was pointing out that there is another way to live. There's another way to learn. There's another way to teach beyond what almost everybody is exposed to. And I think that was the important thing. I think now I've become relatively important by connecting the dots that hundreds of analysts are unable to connect because they don't have an understanding of conservation biology. They haven't spent their lives studying speciation, extinction, and habitat. They're engineers and linguists and mathematicians and statisticians who are running the odds of various things happening. According to Mark Austin, who admittedly may or may not be an actual human being, and he may or may not be sending factual information to me. I mean, that's what spies do, right? They give you some information. Some of it might be accurate. Some of it might not. I don't know whose side he's on here, or if there are even sides. But he indicates that the Jason group in the Pentagon, the people who actually are the smartest people in the room, have indicated that because of abrupt climate change and the catastrophic meltdown of the world's 440-some nuclear power plants, the ionizing radiation will strip away the atmosphere, and we aren't going Venus, where it's 462 degrees Celsius. Rather, we're going Mars with no atmosphere at all. We aren't going to have a heavy atmosphere. We're going to have no atmosphere at all. So that apparently will occur in about 2054. No atmosphere at all, essentially no life on Earth. Perhaps the microbes that are 7 miles below the surface of the Earth will still be respiring slowly away at that point. Or maybe not. My point is, it seemed rather short. And the situation is far more dire than I ever imagined, even when I reached the conclusion of human extinction in the very near term, a conclusion I reached in 2002. And here we are 15 years later, and the situation, of course, is apparently far worse than I could have imagined. I'm a teacher. It's what defines me. It's who I am, it's not what I do. It was always within me. I came home, this is a legendary family story that I heard dozens of times as a kid. I came home within the first week or two of first grade. They didn't have kindergarten where I grew up. And 6 years old, I brought home my Dick and Jane primer and showed it to my 4.5-year-old sister and couldn't understand why she couldn't distinguish between a dog and Spot. And I was very frustrated. So I pointed to the book, what's that? It's a dog. It's Spot. I'm so frustrated. Rinse and repeat with Puff the cat. She just didn't get it. Some students are slow. At 4.5, I'm trying to teach my sister how to read, and I'm so frustrated because she doesn't get it already. So apparently, I was a frustrated teacher early on, and it's something that persists. I was so committed to teaching that one of my colleagues, I'll call her Lisa, because that's her name, became a really good friend of mine and a mentor of mine when I started my work at the University of Arizona. We were fast friends because we were hired on a Research One campus where almost all of the external rewards are given to people for their research, for their scholarship. And teaching was second or third on the list of important things to do from an administrative standpoint. But Lisa was a very good teacher. She took it very seriously. She was a very good mentor as well, and she took me under her wing. And we would talk about teaching and the importance of teaching to us. Many years later, in early January of 2007, she became my department head, and I couldn't have been more ecstatic. I was part of the interview process that selected her, and I remember her clearly saying, I'd been getting into trouble for a while at this point with the administration. And I remember her saying that she would fall on my sword to protect my academic freedom, to write the op-ed pieces, the guest commentaries I'd been writing for local newspapers, pointing out that not all is well in the wonderland known as industrial civilization. So among her first administrative acts was to call a meeting with me to talk about what role I would be serving in the department that she now heads. So early January 2007, I walk into her office, we hug on the way in, we sit down, and the first thing she says is, one of my few responsibilities and duties as department head is to determine who teaches which classes. You won't be teaching any anymore. I don't think this was because I wasn't valued as a teacher or recognized as a good teacher. In fact, by this time, in my second year on campus, I'd received the highest award given to advisors and mentors in my home college, and the highest award given by one of 2 transdisciplinary colleges at the entire university, the graduate college. This award was given to 2 individuals each year from among thousands of faculty members. And so here we are 5 years later, and I'm asked to not teach anymore. Shortly thereafter, I was named Faculty of the Year by the other one of the 2 transdisciplinary colleges at the University of Arizona. There are only 2. So in all 3 of the colleges which I had some affiliation with and 2 of the 2 transdisciplinary colleges at the university, I was acknowledged with their highest honor. So I think that it wasn't because I was a poor teacher that I was doing anything particularly wrong in my teaching efforts. Certainly my students didn't seem to think so. I think there's a reason and there's a connection between being asked to not teach and this information. When I ask in college classes what this is, I shine this up on the board and I ask what it is. Almost everybody says immediately it's a square root function. Okay, it's a square root function. That's what it does. That's its function. It's the square root symbol. It takes the root, the square root, but what is it called? Well, it's called a radical. Why is it called a radical? Because it gets to the root. We've been convinced by a media and a government that radical is a bad thing. We've been convinced that radical really means extremist or terrorist. They become synonymous. But a radical is just somebody who gets to the root of a matter. That's all. I've been a radical for a long time, as indicated when I was 18 years old, and I, with great hubris, gave permission to my classmates to become a nonconformist. It seems so ridiculous when I look at it now that I'm giving them permission. But I was promoting the idea of not conforming to a society already clearly run amok in 1978. How polite of me. For many years, throughout my entire career, in fact, in the college classroom, I was pointing out the lies the culture tells us. And that might be a bit of an overstatement. The culture doesn't really tell us these things. Nobody comes up to you and says humans are superior. Nobody comes up to you and says we can have infinite growth on a finite planet, because if somebody says that, they're immediately recognized as being insane. Instead, we just assume these things. The entire culture assumes infinite growth on a finite planet. We would never talk about it. We would just give people a positive interest rate on their bank accounts, which assumes economic growth forever. We don't say that humans are superior. We just refer to all non-human animals as lesser animals or lower animals. Well, there's a little bit embedded in that sort of language, isn't there? Derrick Jensen's latest book is called The Myth of Human Supremacy. Humans are really good at some things. But when it comes to climbing up a tree, finding food, storing that food, and persisting in a wild habitat for thousands of years, we haven't demonstrated ourselves within this civilization to be particularly good at that. There's more of the lies the culture assumes to us, implies to us, including that we must monetize everything, an idea that didn't exist until a few thousand years ago. 2.8 million years since Homo erectus appeared on the scene, 200,000 years since our species showed up, and a few thousand years ago we decided everything needed to have monetary value. And now, of course, imagine telling somebody that you've decided to live without money. What are you, a stand-up comic? You've decided to live without money. Good luck with that. I mean, you'll be fine, except for the air and the water and the food and the clothing, the shelter. Other than that, you'll be fine. We monetize everything. When I was in New Zealand on tour late last year, New Zealand Air was being sold in steel cans in Beijing for 85 cents a breath. Think about how much energy it took to put that clean New Zealand Air into the can and sell it for 85 cents a breath. Because we long ago monetized water. We long ago monetized food. It's only been within the last few thousand years that we did that. Why? Because civilizations arose. Civilizations depend upon growing grains at scale. If you can't grow grains at scale, you can't have a civilization. It won't work. Once you start growing grains at scale, you can store the grains. You can then get through the hard times. You can stick them in a silo. You can make the bread whenever you want. If you can't do that, then a bunch of people are going to die when the times get hard. Once you do that, once you start storing the food, you can control the food and the distribution of food. Therefore, you can monetize it and you can control the people. Up until then, we're living in anarchism. We were all anarchists until a few thousand years ago. Another one of those words that we're told is a bad word. Anarchists are bad. No, anarchism is a way of life that persisted through the first few million years of the human experience on the planet. Within the last few thousand years, we have something completely different. There's more than one way to live. This one is actually said out loud. Hope is good. And if you don't have hope, there's something wrong with you. Because we must have hope. I'm not sure where we got that. Hope, if you actually look at the definition, you'll find something like, hope is wishing for an outcome over which one has no agency. Hope is depending upon somebody else to make the situation better in the future. It's the opposite side of the coin of fear. 2 4-letter words, hope and fear, about the future. Well, giving up control of that future. We're not going to do anything. We fear that something bad would happen. We hope for the best. How many times have we heard that? But we're not going to take any action on it. We're just going to let it happen. Hope in this culture is viewed as unimpeachably good. I disagree. I think it's wishful thinking. I'm hope-free and I'm liberated by it. I'm free of fear. I don't have any control over how long this set of living arrangements will last. I don't hope that it's going to last until next week or next month or next year. And I don't fear that it will fall apart. Finally, this civilization, like all others, is characterized by endemic racism, endemic misogyny, and endemic monetary disparity, leading to poverty. When the United States elected its latest president, a racist, misogynist, wealthy man, people seemed surprised that at the pinnacle of industrial civilization, a perfect representative of civilization would be selected. Really? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the science because it's out there. It's everywhere. You don't need to go far to find people now writing about abrupt climate change and its obvious outcome. But I'll spend a little bit of time on it. These 3 slides probably should do the trick. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 5th assessment, officially released in 2014 but heavily leaked beginning in September 2013, global warming is irreversible in the absence of massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry. Irreversible, cannot be reversed. It has spun out of human control in the absence of massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry, an approach that the media calls fantasy technology. And the scientists that relate to the party, first with the United States National Academy of Sciences, and then a European group of similar stature, concluded likewise that that's fantasy technology. That geoengineering is likely to make things worse, not better. So that's our best bet to reverse climate change, and it won't work based on the evidence. Ruh-roh. We now know, and some people have known for a long time, that civilization itself, this set of living arrangements, culture, society, whatever you want to call it, that has us depending upon grains and getting through the, quote, hard times as a result of grain storage, that this set of living arrangements is by itself an omnicidal heat engine. We kill everything. We drive to extinction 200 species a day, every single day. Collateral damage for empire, we say. I didn't do that. I was born into it, just like the rest of us. just like the rest of us. We were born into the captivity that is civilization. We have come to depend upon it for our very lives. It's difficult to let go. When I recognized it for what it was, not so much the heat engine part, but the part that it was driving so many species to extinction, I created an off-grid homestead in the wilds of New Mexico. I began looking for the place in early 2005, settled on the spot in August of 2007, and moved there full-time in May of 2009 and created the platinum-grade off-grid homestead with a straw-bale duplex, solar panels, and an outdoor kitchen. Suddenly I'm growing all kinds of vegetables, and I have a biochar kiln, and I'm using the sun to heat my food and feeding goats out of, that's not a beer bottle. Well, it is a beer bottle, but it has mother's milk in the beer bottle, just to be clear. Goats are not fond of pale ale, as it turns out. And I was preserving food too. And when I started this project, I'm a lifelong academic. At 6 years old, I was going home and frustrated that my 4.5-year-old sister couldn't read yet. So this is what I do. I read. I read and I teach and I experience the world with my students. But I couldn't distinguish between a screwdriver and a zucchini. I didn't actually know how to do anything. And then a year or two later, I'm doing all these things. And so I left this position of enormous privilege and took out all my, quote, retirement funds that my wife and I had worked so hard to save for all those years to go all in on saving the planet. And I just assumed, especially once I wrote a book about it, that everybody would fall into line. Look, people, this is what it's going to take. At least 1 out of every 10 of us, maybe more, are going to have to start growing all the food. Because we can't have fewer than 1% of the farmers growing the food for us anymore. We got to do this. And so, of course, I just assumed, since there was going to be a test, that people would fall in line. Look, the professor's doing this. Maybe we should too. I didn't realize that the lesson came after the exam. The lesson in this case was that people thought that was a really bad idea. You go ahead, crazy man. We'll watch. And so that's largely what happened and caused me to lose essentially every relationship in my life. Because how crazy would you have to be to leave a position where you're making 6 figures to actually not do anything? I was asked to not teach. I could do whatever I want. It was the professor's dream at a research institution. I can now do whatever I want, liberated from the classroom. Of course, I couldn't walk away from the classroom. I was teaching poetry in various incarceration facilities. Poetry. I'm a conservation biologist, and I'm teaching poetry because I have to teach because it's within me. I used to take my honors students, one of the 4 legs of a program called Poetry Inside Out. I used to take them along with the other teachers, to the girls' pods of the Pima County Juvenile Detention Facility. And so they would interact with, for a couple of hours, the honor students, all upper middle class white kids, would interact for a couple of hours with almost universally 13 to 17-year-old Latinas. These are girls who have had things go the wrong way, we'll say. They are being raised by a sibling or by a single parent, almost always their mother. They have been abused in every conceivable way, most recently sexually abused by their mother's current boyfriend. They've been shot at, they've been knifed, they've had a friend die in their arms. And after every new honors student would spend a couple of hours with these kids, we'd walk outside, we'd sit at the bench right outside of Juvie Hall, and we'd say, so what did you think? That was the exit exam, the exit question for the honors student. What did you think? And they would ponder for a minute, and almost uniformly they would say something like, they're just like me. They're just like me. I have no idea how to teach empathy, but they were learning it. I think that's the most important thing we could possibly teach. I don't know how, but they were learning it. Well, as it turns out, civilization is an omnicidal heat engine, and we didn't know this in 2007, we didn't know this in 2009, we didn't know this until late 2011. that if we turn off the heat engine of civilization, it gets hotter even faster. There was some evidence in 2001 when U.S. planes stopped flying, and 3 days later, there was a marked change in the temperature signature of the planet. We didn't stop burning coal. Planes were flying elsewhere. We didn't stop driving cars. In fact, we were driving more. So nobody could get on a plane all of a sudden. It was just a reduction in air transport for 3 days, and it changes the temperature signature of the planet. As it turns out, there's something called global dimming, or the aerosol masking effect. When we burn fossil fuels, most notably coal, and especially, quote, low-quality coal, clean coal doesn't have much sulfur in it. And so the other stuff, the unclean coal, has a lot of sulfur in it. And when we burn it, it puts sulfates into the atmosphere, and those sulfates act as an umbrella. So not only does burning fossil fuels increase the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which traps the heat that does get in, but at the same time, burning fossil fuels, especially coal, puts an umbrella over the atmosphere and stops sunlight from even getting in. And when we stop burning the coal, when we stop putting the sulfates into the atmosphere, when civilization goes away, there will be about a 3 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise in a few days if civilization shuts down quickly. So, civilization is an omnicidal heat engine. The absence of civilization is a heat engine as well, which is almost certain to remove habitat for most complex life on Earth within a matter of days when it goes away. A little bit more about the science. A man named Sam Curran, or maybe it's a woman, we don't know. Sam Curran apparently is 2 or 3 people, somebody in Western Europe, somebody in the East Coast of the United States or Canada, and somebody maybe on the West Coast of the United States or Canada. And it's an anonymous person. Sam Curran is a made-up name, probably because somebody wanted to keep their job. And I guarantee you won't be supported in your job if you write the kinds of things Sam Curran writes. You might not lose your job, but you will lose support. So about a year ago, he or she wrote an essay pondering the potential for a 10 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise, actually 10.02 degrees Celsius, above the 1750 baseline of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution by the middle of 2026, 10 years later. Bear in mind that according to a legal brief filed by James Hansen just about 2 years ago, we've had humans on the planet only 2 degrees Celsius above baseline, above the 1750 baseline. That's as high as the global average temperature has supported humans at any time in the past. We've had humans, our species Homo sapiens, for this much time, about 200,000 years, relative to the last 2 billion years on Earth. Notice the temperature signature for the last 2 billion years on Earth. Most of the time has been spent at what we'll call hothouse, 22 degrees Celsius, with another stable point at ice age, or snowball Earth, at 12 degrees Celsius. Look at that, it's only 10 degrees Celsius between the two. That's 18 degrees Fahrenheit difference. So this is about 50 degrees. And this is about 68 degrees global average temperature. And yet, this is dinosaurs, and this is an ice age. Small, subtle differences in global average temperature make a tremendous difference for life on Earth. Notice how little stability of temperature there is between ice age and hothouse. There's something here about 300 million years ago, something here a really long time ago, and something right here for a few thousand years. For a few thousand years, a couple thousand years after we came out of the last ice age, the temperature of the planet stabilized at about 13.5 degrees Celsius. Remember, ice age is 12 degrees Celsius. It warmed up ever so slightly, 1.5 degrees Celsius, about 3 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's it. And then the temperature stabilized. And it stabilized for a couple thousand years, and then boom, all of a sudden we had a half a dozen civilizations pop up all over the globe. In the interior of large continents, mostly in the northern hemisphere, we were suddenly able to grow grain, mostly corn. That had never happened before. Suddenly we got corn growing everywhere, and we're able to store food and get through the hard times. And now we're in human population overshoot here and here and here and here. And all over the place, humans are getting through the hard times now. That's only been within the last few thousand years that has ever occurred in the history of the planet. James Hansen indicates that there is habitat for humans at about 2 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. Conservatively, we're right there right now, where the blue arrow indicates about 1.6 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. Because of the importance of habitat, Oliver Tickell wrote a paper in The Guardian that appeared in August 2008, headlined "On a Planet 4C Hotter," and he's talking here about 4 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. On a planet 4C hotter, all we can prepare for is extinction. Well, that'd be right there, considerably higher than the temperature ever experienced by humans on Earth. So I suspect that's a pretty conservative assessment. The paper then goes on to say that humans will be fine up to maybe 5 or 6 degrees Celsius, but I don't know of a single climate scientist who believes that civilization will be retained at above 2 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. So that's going to be inconvenient. The important point here from Oliver Tickell's paper in The Guardian, pointing out that at 4 degrees C, all we can plan for, whatever that means, is extinction. The important point here is habitat. Habitat, habitat, habitat. If I were a realtor promoting conservation biology, that would be my tagline. Conservation biologists study speciation, extinction, and habitat. What does it take for a species to persist on the planet? It takes habitat. We tend to think of habitat as the homes we live in, the ceiling fans that are running, the lights that come on. But we're animals too. We're human animals, and we depend upon a complex web of life for our own persistence. I doubt we would have that complex web of life at 4 degrees Celsius warmer than the baseline, especially given the rapidity with which we're headed there. We cannot survive the dust storm that never ends. Like any livestock, we cannot survive without food. I can assure you the rancher was providing water for these cattle, but they still ran out of grass. They still ran out of food. Sam Carana adds up all of the contributors to global warming over the course of the next 9 years, approximately. He put this together about a year ago. He points out that so far, we've experienced 1.92 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. So from 1750 to 2016, global average temperature has gone up 1.92 degrees. The scientific consensus is about 1.6 degrees Celsius. The referee journal literature in a recent paper indicates that we're missing about 19% of the warming since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, just because of the way we measure the temperature on the planet. But I'll still go with the conservative number of 1.6 above baseline from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution until 2016. Carana then adds on another half a degree Celsius, about 1 degree Fahrenheit, for the temperature rise over the course of the next 10 years. And we see the same thing with the extra water vapor feedback, which is equivalent to the CO2 input, or the carbon dioxide input. And the idea here is that the maximum heating associated with carbon dioxide emissions is delayed by about 10 years. So from the time we fire up the internal combustion engine, from the time we turn on the lights and make the coal-fired power plant kick in a little bit more coal, from the time we do that and the carbon dioxide is emitted into the atmosphere, it's about 10 years before there's a maximum heating associated with that molecule. There's this lag between what we do and the consequence. And so we've already added in half a degree and another half a degree. We're already at 1, no matter what we do, 1 more than the 1.6 we're at. So that puts us at 2.6 just based on carbon dioxide. Never mind the absence of global dimming, never mind the other self-reinforcing feedback loops that have been triggered at this point, which are many. The aerosol masking effect, Carana conservatively estimates that at 2.5 degrees Celsius, even though a paper from the Journal of Geophysical Research Atmospheres 2013 indicates it's closer to 3, and this is a very conservative source. All of these refereed journal literature sources are very, very conservative. They have to go through a difficult process of peer review, which tends to make the scientific process and the results of the scientific process very conservative. Carana takes a more conservative approach than that in a couple of cases here, and I'll stick with whichever is more conservative, the one he says or the one that the conservative refereed journal literature says. If we just take the journal literature at heart instead of Carana's low-balling conservative approach, then I suspect we're headed for a higher than the number I come up with, which is at least 8.7 degrees Celsius above baseline. So we add up these other things. Albedo changes in the Arctic because the ice in the Arctic is going away. It appears that, consistent with the prediction by the U.S. Naval Postgraduate College in 2013 that we would have an ice-free Arctic in 2016 plus or minus 3 years, it looks like that's going to happen this year or maybe next year. An ice-free Arctic. What does that mean? Well, it's never happened in human history. The last time that happened was more than 3 million years ago. Our species, Homo sapiens, the self-proclaimed wise ape, or if you want to get technical, Homo sapiens sapiens, the double ape self-proclaimed wise ape, has never observed an ice-free Arctic. In fact, the last time it happened was 15 times longer ago than Homo sapiens appeared on the planet. So that's going to be awkward because the radiance, the albedo, the reflectance from the ice, once the ice is gone, turns into absorption of heat. So the oceans heat up even faster. Seafloor methane could come spewing out of the Arctic Ocean. Natalia Shukova and colleagues predicted or at least considered at the European Geophysical Union meetings in 2008 that such an event would produce an increase of 1.3 degrees Celsius with a 50 gigaton burst of methane that they said was highly likely at any time. And so on. So this all adds up, if we take the very conservative approach, stacked on top of Carana's already conservative approach, I get 8.7 degrees above baseline in an essay I wrote the 1st of August last year. And consider, for example, these further feedbacks, which Carana adds 0.3 degrees Celsius over the course of the next 10 years. That's since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in 1750, only 0.3 degrees. And that is inanely conservative. That includes, among more than 6 other self-reinforcing feedback loops, or so-called positive feedbacks, it includes input from terrestrial permafrost. So the methane that comes out of the permafrost as the permafrost melts down and launches methane into the atmosphere. Methane is more than 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, molecule for molecule. So let's take a quick look at a video embedded at SiberianTimes.com from about a year ago indicating how much methane could be released from permafrost. It's this short little video clip. If you listen to it about the 15-second mark, and I'll try to point out to it where the heel is going into the earth, you'll be able to hear over the noise of the microphone a high hissing sound. That's pressurized methane and carbon dioxide spewing directly out of the planet, directly out of Earth. The sound was working so beautifully before you all showed up. Sorry. Well, if you go to the clip at SiberianTimes.com, when he sticks his boot in this next time, right there, he makes a little hole, and you can hear a high hissing noise as pressurized methane and carbon dioxide come spewing out of the earth. And to think that this would only add 0.3 degrees Celsius from the beginning of the 1750 Industrial Revolution until today, or 10 years from today, seems ludicrous to me. But I'm taking a very conservative approach because we're talking about habitat for our favorite species, after all. This has been the approach my entire life. My parents, when I was 10 years old, I can remember my parents talking about how we need to change or the planet is going to be in really dire shape for their children. I was 10. That was 47 years ago, if you're doing the math. And we did change. We made everything a lot worse. We cut down more trees. We eroded more soil. We polluted more water. We fouled more air. We drove to extinction tens of thousands of species in that time. We changed a lot of things, all of them for the worse. I want to remind you that we've had humans approximately 2 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline at any time in the past, and we're headed for something like a route right here. This is the number I get when I add to 8.7, taking a very conservative approach to Sam Carana's very conservative approach. I think it's more likely, based on the journal literature, that we're headed for something like right here, 23 degrees Celsius. That's the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth over the course of the last 2 billion years. That happened 252.2 million years ago, and it coincided with the worst mass extinction event in planetary history. It's called the Great Dying, because the temperature rose so quickly that species could not keep up. This time, the acceleration in temperature is happening at least an order of magnitude, at least 10 times faster than it did then. This took somewhere between 880 and 18,800 years to go from there to there. This time we're getting there in a decade. There won't be a tree on the planet. Interestingly, if we thought trees were important for, say, broadcasting Wi-Fi, we would never let one of them be cut down. But since they only provide our oxygen, we think, what the hell? When I say things like, in 10 years, taking Sam Carana's analysis, in 10 years it's going to look like this from mid-2016. When I say 10 years, almost everybody in the audience assumes that everybody on the planet is going to die in their sleep on midnight, June 15th, 2026. That's not what I'm talking about. In fact, it might be a lot worse than this. This is taking a fairly linear approach. To get to here is just adding up feedbacks in a linear manner and assuming going forward that it's going to be sort of like it was in the past with these feedbacks. But it seems more likely to me that we're in the midst of exponential temperature rise. Sam Carana comes up with this analysis about 9 days ago, and he concludes that we're headed for 10 degrees C or 18 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in 4 years, not 10. Just extrapolating forward using the exponential function instead of a linear function. If you think this is crazy, bear in mind that it was a similar analysis conducted about 5 years ago, projecting a 4 degrees C temperature rise by 2030. 4 degrees by 2030 seems ridiculous now. That seems so inanely conservative that it's impossible that it could happen, because the temperature is rising so much quicker than it was 5 years ago. And we have so much more evidence over the course of the last 5 years. So it could be that we're headed for 10 degrees Celsius warmer, 10 C above the 1750 baseline in 4 years. This does not mean that in 3 years and 364 days, everybody's going to die in their sleep. It could be much faster than that. I want to refer again to Natalia Shukova and her colleagues, including her partner Igor Semeletov, concluding at the European Geophysical Union meeting from 2008 that release of up to 50 gigatons of hydrate, methane hydrate, is highly possible for abrupt release at any time. That was almost a decade ago. It's been highly possible for abrupt release at any time. To think it will not happen in the presence of an ice-free Arctic, I think is wishful thinking. I think that's hoping. This, which would almost certainly lead to collapse of civilization because it would be about 1.5 degrees higher than the temperature experienced by humans at any time in the past, by Homo sapiens anyway, would almost certainly collapse civilization, would add about another 3 degrees C, and that takes us to about 6 C above the 1750 baseline, but potentially as early as September, or if the collapse of civilization is forestalled until we are unable to grow grains at scale next spring or summer, then maybe it'll wait until the middle of next year. I don't see a lot of people surviving 6 degrees Celsius above baseline unless they're in bunkers and have managed to store a lot of canned peaches. No offense, I love canned peaches just as much as the next guy. So I don't want to, my message here is not that we have 9 years and 42 days. It's not that we have 4 years and whatever. It's that time is short, that we don't have long, that there are 7 days in a week, and someday is not one of them. So if you got things you want to get done, if you have relationships that you need to have heal, if you have your bucket list, which I hope includes a strong focus on interactions with human beings and the rest of the living planet, instead of partying like it's 1999, if you have those things you want to get done, I would suggest you not wait until someday. Someday never comes. It's not as if we haven't known. It's not as if there weren't people sounding the alarm. Noel Brown, director of the New York office of the United Nations Environment Program, was widely quoted by the Associated Press, so this quote appeared in almost every newspaper in the United States in 1989, saying we have 10 years to solve this whole carbon dioxide problem. Well, that was 38 years ago. And what have we done? We made the situation worse in every way. And I suspect that the situation did spin out of human control within a decade of him making this statement. I suspect that the clathrate gun in the Arctic Ocean has been fired. I suspect that these self-reinforcing feedback loops took the situation out of human hands in 1999 or thereabouts. I suspect that it's well beyond human control at this point, and taking the most conservative analysis I can possibly imagine, I get us to 8.7 degrees by the middle of 2026, and it could be much sooner than that before we're out of habitat for humans. Remember, we're talking about habitat. Remember, we received warnings from another part of the United Nations, the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases, a year and a couple of months after Noel Brown made his statement. The United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases says beyond 1 degree C, oh, that's the scientific target. It's not 2 degrees C like an economist told us, and somehow we believe that crap. It's 1 degree C is the absolute upper limit beyond which we cannot cross, or we'll elicit rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses. That sounds like self-reinforcing feedback loops to me. That sounds like exponential increase in temperature rise to me. That will lead to extensive ecosystem damage, otherwise known as loss of habitat. Because people working on the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases weren't stupid. They included biologists, not economists. So they actually understood the importance of habitat for even our favorite species. We've known. Climate writer and speaker David Spratt says that 1 degree was nonsense and that probably 0.5 degree was the Rubicon which we could not cross before we started triggering these self-reinforcing feedback loops. Well, 0.5 degree above the 1750 baseline was a long time ago. After some of the people in this room were born. Think about that. No blame, no shame, no guilt. We were all born into captivity. We just showed up without even being asked at a certain time in history, a certain place on the planet, and have enjoyed enormous privilege as a result of that. And everybody's going to die. In response to all these warnings, this is what we did. This is me. I'm not immune, right? I got my precious too. I've coined a new term. Photographers and artists refer to the hour of sunlight, the hour of beautiful light, coincident with sundown or just after sundown. That's the golden hour. And sometimes there's the blue hour where everything looks blue because it's a little later than that. I have the precious hour. That time in the morning when I get my iPhone and I get to spend an hour looking at it and answering my email messages. Oh, my precious iPhone. So yeah, I'm as guilty as the next person. Just like you, I was born into captivity too. I wasn't asked which jail cell I wanted put in. I was just thrown into one. What are we to do? You want me to terminate civilization? I tried that. I moved off grid. Nobody followed. And now it's too late. It was too late then. We're beyond half a degree above baseline at that point, triggering these self-reinforcing feedback loops. Not only that, we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction on planet Earth. It took the refereed journal literature 20 years to catch up to the idea. 20 years after books were written on the sixth mass extinction and that it's underway. Finally, Science Advances publishes a paper about 2 years ago indicating accelerated modern human-induced species losses. Yeah, that's a mouthful. It says we're in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. Entering the sixth mass extinction. Entering? At the time this was published, there had been a United Nations report that came out in August of 2010 indicating we're driving to extinction 150 to 200 species a day. Entering? Are you out of your minds? Entering? We've been there for a long time. And the scientific community just finally realizes it. Oh, look, stuff's happening. Science is nothing more than elucidation of the obvious. That's the whole point. Any artist with a set of eyes knows exactly what's going on in the world long before the scientific community notices. And I'm a scientist. I'm trying to defend myself here, but it's really difficult. The lead author of this paper in Science Advances, Gerardo Ceballos, in an interview coincident with release of the paper, points out that life would take many millions of years to recover, many millions of years. And that's been the case with each of the 5 previous mass extinction events, many millions of years before we have a verdant, vibrant planet again. And our species itself, we can't quite say the words, Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise ape, would likely disappear early on. Well, he's wrong about that. We weren't among the first to disappear. 200 species a day being driven to extinction since at least August of 2010. We weren't first. We certainly won't be last because we are very, very complex organisms. In fact, this body that I call me is actually thousands of species. There's a whole bunch going on in here. You know, we think we're in charge. We think we're the captain of this ship. But actually, we're just shoveling coal somewhere down in the basement. We're not really in charge. We've got all these other organisms. Let me tell you, if one of those organisms in your stomach is having a bad day, ain't nobody happy. And there are hundreds of them. And that's not to consider the hundreds of species out there that we rely upon. You think the little things don't matter? People tell me all the time, yeah, those extinctions are really bad apparently, but it's just little stuff, right? Little stuff? Just little stuff? Yeah, little stuff like pollinators, like filter feeders that clean the water. Okay, so once we get rid of the pollinators and the filter feeders that clean our water and that pollinate our food, it doesn't look all that promising for us, the wise ape. I have good news, because I wouldn't leave you with bad news. I do have a version with a happy ending. How could I not? I'm right here in the land of Hollywood. It's showing on a TV screen, for crying out loud. You get to die. Oh, wait. Maybe that didn't come off quite right. That might have been a little abrupt. You get to live. You get to live. Yes, we have to die, like every single living thing. We have to die. But what that really means is we get to live, should we choose. We get to live. We know a lot about the universe. Science is actually good for things. Science is a way of understanding, a way of knowing the universe. Science tells us how many atoms there are in the universe, believe it or not. And it wasn't some guy counting with a bunch of graduate students. It's an estimate. We know a lot about DNA. We know enough about DNA to know that the odds against any of us appearing in physical form at any time, ever, the odds against that happening exceed the odds against plucking a single atom at random from the entire universe. And yet, here we are. Here you are. We're all right here. As evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins says, in the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I that are privileged to be here. Privileged with eyes to see where we are and brains to wonder why. We got the big brains. We got blessed and cursed with the big brains. The eyes to see where we are and the brains to wonder why. We weren't given a choice. We didn't get to vote. When I came out of the womb, covered in another human being's blood, with nothing to my name, not even a name, I still have most of it left, by the way, all that stuff I came into the world with. We didn't have a choice. We didn't get to say, hey, this looks shitty out here. I want to go back in. No, doctors won't put you back in, even if you wanted to. We just showed up. We were incredibly privileged to show up when we did and to make it this far. I look at the things that happened to me when I was a teenager, and I can't believe I survived that. And probably you have similar memories. I certainly didn't deserve to survive my teen years, but I do get to live. Contrary to what you read on the internet about me, I might be crazy. I'm not going to contest that part. And I might be dim, but I don't promote inaction. There's a lot of actions I recommend people take, including remaining calm for some of us and becoming calm for the rest, because nothing is under our control. The universe is going to go on doing what the universe is doing, and it doesn't really give a damn whether you're there or not. You might think you're really important. If you think you're really important, skip work for a week. You think you're irreplaceable? Try that. And that's just this big. Here we are, with the eyes to see where we are and the brains to wonder why. We get to be here, but it's really not under our control. Whether civilization persists another week or another month or another 10 years, that has nothing to do with us. We were born into captivity, and whether we show up or not, the system will grind on until it can't. Remain calm. Nothing, and there's an exception here, because there are some things under your control, right? We all know this. You spend time with a certain number of people most of the time. You're in your family, you're with the people you work with, you're with the people you cohabitate with. You see a lot of people regularly during your day. And if you go up to those people, to those certain people every day, and you say, you still going to keep that mustache? Really? The way that looks? You know, you could do that to somebody, and it's going to make them feel like they're missing. And you could get all your friends to say the same thing, and then this guy thinks, geez, my mustache is that bad? I love your mustache, by the way. Looks a lot like mine. But you could do that. You could make somebody miserable. You can make almost anybody miserable. We all have that within us, but it's a pretty small circle. Some individuals can make a lot of people miserable. Here I'm thinking about presidents, senators, and that sort of thing. And apparently they're working really hard at it. You can also, in a culture of mediocrity, which will return you nothing positive in response, you can pursue excellence. You can. It will cost you everything. It will cost you your friends and probably your job. It will cost you money. It will cost you stature. It will cost you power in a culture of mediocrity to pursue excellence. And why not do it anyway? Because then at the end of the day, or really any time during the day, you can go look in the mirror and you can ask yourself whether I did something excellent today, whether I pursued excellence in every way I could imagine, in every way possible. And you can answer, honestly, yes. And that's worth all those friends and that job. At least it is to me. Likewise, the pursuit of love. Again, there's no reward, and I'm differentiating here between power and love, and sex and love. Love of doing what you want to do. Love of living instead of making a living. Love of the people around you, love of the living planet. These have rewards. Again, none of them external that I've been able to detect. But in your heart, you know. You know what matters to you. And that's the ability to look in the mirror. I don't need to define these things because you have a dictionary, and if you don't, you have a digital device that has a dictionary in it. So you can find out what these things mean, and they probably mean something different for all of us anyway. What you define as excellence, apparently what sociopaths who are routinely elected president in this country, what they assume is excellent is completely different than what I think is excellent. Because we're pursuing completely different things there. So maybe those people, along with Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein, can actually look themselves in the mirror and say, I made $4 billion today, it must have been a great day. But that's not what drives me. And I'm betting it's not what drives you either. Another thing we can do in the way of taking action is that we can take some advice from our four-legged friends about why their lives are so much happier than ours are. When you take your dog to the park and there's 4 trees in the sun, your dog sees, oddly enough, 4 trees in the sun. What do you see? No trees, no sun. You see the fight you had. You see the work you need to do. You see the bills you need to pay. You see the future that you're hoping or fearing. You see the past. You're not living in the now. You're living in the somewhere else. Roll around with your dog for a while. Get your pants dirty. Finally, we were all born into captivity, but we don't have to reinforce the cage. We can let go. We can throw off some of the shackles of a culture run mad by madmen, almost all of them men. The expectations of others were the bars I use for my own cage. That's exactly how we got here. Because everybody was going to go to school and then go to school some more and then get married and have 2.5 children and work until they were too old to actually go anywhere and then decide they were going to start having fun. The expectations of the culture were the cage we all built to ensure that we didn't get out of line. It's time to get out of line. There's more. There's always more. I'm a professor. I can profess for hours. If you want to just know the facts, the facts about the science, there's a single essay at Nature Bats Last that you can read all about. There are books, The Extinction Dialogues, which I co-wrote with Carolyn Baker, PhD counselor, the subtitle of which is really important here, How to Live with Death in Mind. This is not a book of doom. My message is not a message of doom. My message is not how to die, slowly, miserably, painfully, like everybody else. It's how to live with death over your left shoulder. It's how to live with urgency. And the whole story for children of all ages, at least from ages 11 and up, the whole story of this set of living arrangements is told in this work of fiction based on the perspective of a honeybee and a ladybug. And finally, there's a workshop for those of you who have reached acceptance of the evidence leading to our near-term demise, and we don't have to agree that our near-term demise is 10 years from now or 4 years from now or 18 months from now or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We don't have to agree with that. But if you've reached this conclusion of acceptance based on the evidence, then you probably find yourself in a very lonely situation. If you're looking for people to talk to about that, we have a workshop called Only Love Remains that's found at onlyloveremains.org. So if you want to have the conversation that nobody else is willing to have, we can talk about it there. Thank you all for your rapt attention. I will stay as long as they will let me, one-on-one with your individual questions. I suspect there are questions from the live stream as well. So if anybody has a question or a comment at this point, I would gladly take it on. Thank you. A question, sir?
Yeah, you said when it's over and done, pretty much, that the planet would wind up being like Mars and not Venus. What's the difference, and can you explain the mechanics of why?
Sure. The difference is Venus has a really heavy atmosphere that causes it to be about 462 degrees Celsius on Venus. Got it. So the temperature on the surface of Venus is about 462 degrees Celsius. That's really hot because of the very heavy atmosphere. On Mars, there is no atmosphere. It has never developed an atmosphere, apparently. At least there's not one there now. And because of abrupt temperature rise and the resultant meltdown of the world's nuclear power facilities, that ionizing radiation in our atmosphere will strip our atmosphere away, take it up into space. We will no longer have this thin protective layer filled with nitrogen and oxygen and a few other compounds that allow us to breathe and live. So that's the difference. So the Elon Musks of the world who are planning their trip to Mars to escape Earth, they don't need to leave. Mars is coming here. Hang around. No need to blast your rocket into space. So, great question. Thank you. Is there a question from the live stream? No? How about if I beg? I'm begging you.
I got a question. Oh, yeah, are we still getting any satellite data, or is that starting to dry up?
We are still getting satellite data. The process of defunding and consequently shutting down data collection is almost certainly underway, but is not complete yet. So there are a bunch of agencies that are being defunded that focus on observations, that focus, like NASA, for example, and their satellites that are making direct observations. It was NASA's CARVE project that pointed out, I think in 2013, that there are methane plumes in the Arctic 150 kilometers across. That's really handy to know, but terrifying too, so we don't want to report that too widely from the government through the media. So I suspect there's a lot of information we have access to now that we won't have access to in the not too distant future. And I think that's too bad, but again, remain calm. Nothing is under our control. You know, we're very limited in the power of the people to have any significant impact over what kind of data get collected.
I've heard we also get some data from Japan too.
Oh, yeah. It's not just the United States that is collecting data on overall planetary temperature, on all kinds of factors that are important. The UK's Met Office, meteorological office from the UK, has been very important. And occasionally you'll see these numbers. You know, I said that the consensus is about 1.6 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. That's where we're at right now. But there's minor differences between what NASA reports, what the UK Met Office reports, what the Japanese government reports, what the Australian government report. So there are minor differences in our ability to measure using different devices what the temperature even is at the global level. So that confounds the picture, and you're right, we are not necessarily going to rely only on data from the United States, although of course, because the United States has been so wealthy since World War II, that we've led the charge on the scientific front and on the data collection front. So if we lose the information from here, that's pretty bad news, but it might not be the only news we have.
Guy, could you tell us again?
Just a second, she had a question first.
Oh, sorry.
Well, actually, that's okay. Actually, I want to thank you for your courage and for speaking a truth. And I want to give you something. It's purple aventurine.
Purple aventurine?
Aventurine.
Aventurine.
Aventurine. Look up the
Is it
name.
poisonous?
No.
Should I eat it?
Poisonous, it's warm.
Thank you very much. This is why I let other people talk, Mark, instead of you.
Could you tell us again about the albedo effect and your glass of ice explanation?
Okay, the albedo is reflectance, so the more white ice there is, the less exposed blue ocean there is. Once we get rid of that ice, we're no longer reflecting, we're just absorbing. I think what you're talking about is latent heat. And so here with fresh water, not with salt water, with plain old water that comes out of your tap, the freezing point is 0 degrees Celsius. And I'm sorry to use scientific terms, but I'm a scientist, so my entire job is to obfuscate the whole situation, confuse everybody with terms they don't understand. So I'm just going to stick with that. You take a glass of your favorite beverage at your next party, and you fill the glass half full with water and half full of the beverage. And notice that as you walk around for the next 2 or 3 hours, the temperature of the liquid never changes. As long as there's the smallest sliver of ice there, it's going to be very close to 0 degrees Celsius. It's going to be very close to freezing, that beverage is. As long as you have just the tiniest bit of ice, all the way from half a cup of ice to the last little sliver, it's 0 degrees. It might get up to 1 degree Celsius. You're holding it in your hand and it's room temperature, but it's going to be pretty close to 0. It depends upon how much sugar and salt is in that drink and so on. Okay, as soon as the last sliver of ice is gone, things change rather profoundly. It takes 79.2 calories to convert 1 gram of ice to 1 milliliter of liquid water. 79.2 calories, just round up and say 80. About 80 calories to transform a gram of ice water, solid water, into a gram of liquid water. Once it's water, once there's no ice, you put that same 80 calories in, and it heats up the temperature of that gram of water, of that milliliter of water, to 80 degrees Celsius. If you want to know what that number is in Fahrenheit, it's scalding. It's scalding hot. It's not boiling, but it's really hot. So you put the same energy in. We get the same energy from the sun for all practical purposes. There's been a little bit of dimming, and there's some variability from day to day, but it's basically the same amount of energy coming from the sun all the time. We get rid of that Arctic ice, and all of that heat goes into heating water instead of melting ice. There's 2 words to explain that. We're screwed. That's the whole story. That's latent heat. So notice next time you're at that party, and you can still go even with this information, you just can't tell people. Or that'll be your last party. So get a big old glass of water or something and put a bunch of ice in it and carry it around. You know, this is 2 or 3 hours before the ice is all gone. And then 20 minutes later, that thing is at room temperature. It goes up like that. It's not just because it's in your hand and your body is 98.6 degrees, and because it's at room temperature, and because all that heat is going into heating the water instead of melting the ice. It's huge. And that's where Peter Wadham's projection from one of these early figures comes from, indicating a global average temperature rise of 1.6 degrees Celsius over the course of the next 10 years. I think it's right there. So that's albedo changes. That's not even, never mind, that's not even the latent heat. But Wadhams has done some work with latent heat as well. Got a question from the live stream?
A few questions. I can read you a couple of them, and you can choose which one you want to answer. Somebody asks if you've heard of Paul Hawkins' new book, Drawdown.
I have heard of Paul Hawkins' new book, Drawdown. I have not read it. I can comment on it, but it wouldn't be kind. I try to be compassionate even to people who don't get it. Oh. You know, the notion that we can keep doing things the same way and expect a different outcome is insane. Civilization is an omnicidal heat engine, and Paul Hawken and many others who are leaders in the sustainability movement want to sustain the omnicide, want to sustain imperialism, want to sustain civilization. That's not working. I don't care if we switch to solar panels and wind turbines, civilization is still a heat engine. And this is based on thermodynamics, which forms the basis for Tim Garrett's work and the papers he has written on that subject. So thinking that we can draw down, and that's the basis of the fantasy technology Truthout was talking about, in which the National Academy of Sciences and the European body pointed out our fantasy technology. We don't have the technology to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So to think we could make minor changes in the set of living arrangements, to think that we can switch to LED bulbs, it's not squirrely light bulbs anymore, it's the LED bulbs, and drive Priuses and garden differently or farm differently than we've been doing before, but still maintain this set of living arrangements, think we can do that and it's all going to work out just fine, is the reason that Serena Raphael's best friend nearly committed suicide. Those are the lies the culture tells us. Oh, you had another question in case I didn't want to insult somebody with that response?
There are a few questions about ionizing radiation. I think there's a couple of questions. It seems that people aren't they don't really have a good handle on understanding the process of how that, burns up the atmosphere. Is that what kills us, or is loss of habitat? Why hasn't ionizing radiation burnt up the atmosphere in the 50s and 60s?
Oh, okay. So ionizing radiation was not released at scale when we test bombed nuclear weapons. Ionizing radiation was produced in relatively small doses compared to even Fukushima, where 3 or 4 of the stations melted down and started spewing ionizing radiation into the atmosphere and into the ocean. According to a headline I read within the last week, that's killed about a third of the ocean so far. It's been 6 years. And really, we're just getting started at that. Ionizing radiation into the atmosphere. I have a friend and colleague and a man who has hosted me in New Zealand for a couple of tours, Kevin Hester, and he was studying ionizing radiation and its implications for the planet for years. And he was terrified about the multi-generational horrors that would result from lethal mutations in humans over the course of generations. Because that's what ionizing radiation does. It changes our genetic makeup. It messes with what's going on at the fundamental level of the human cell. And so it doesn't take many generations before every species becomes sterile in light of that. But along the way, there's, 6-eyed salmon and 3-legged humans and all those other horrible things. And so Kevin Hester comes across my message, and he's enormously relieved. Relieved of the terrors of the multi-generational atrocities associated with ionizing radiation. I'm not an expert on ionizing radiation. Helen Caldecott is. There's a lot of people you can read who will tell you a lot more than I know about what happens to the atmosphere when ionizing radiation gets up there and starts stripping it away, who will tell you a lot more than I know about the biological consequences of ionizing radiation and swimming and breathing in that soup. As nearly as I can tell, there's no good outcome in the future when we have Fukushima times 100 or 150 or 200. You're such a bummer. Anybody else?
Can you connect the dots as to how this ionized radiation will occur through climate change?
Last weekend, there was an extreme weather event in western Kansas that destroyed 1/5 of the wheat crop for the country. 1/5 in a weekend, attributed to abrupt climate change. It was such a mild winter that the wheat grew quickly. It emerged and was high enough already that when the big late snowstorm and hailstorm showed up in western Kansas last weekend, it killed the entire wheat crop in the area. There goes 20% of the wheat for the country for this year. During the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, the United States government badly needing money and needing to pump the money through the system to maintain civilization, to maintain the set of living arrangements, sold the entire grain supply. There is no surplus remaining. We don't have a backup plan. We don't have canned peaches at the level of the country anymore. So we just lost 20% of the wheat harvest for this year, and that's from a single event, from a single weekend. The weather is not getting any nicer in terms of the ability to grow grains. The ability to grow grains depends upon a stable, cool climate at about 13.5, maybe even 15.5 degrees Celsius. But we get above 2 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline, which takes us up to 15.5 degrees Celsius. We can't grow grains anymore, not at scale. And people tell me all the time, well, we'll just move the grain growing belt to Canada or Alaska. No way. No way. Grains grow on mollisols. You have to know a little bit about soils to understand the biology and the ecology of growing food. We are not going to take mollisols. We are not going to scrape off the Great Plains in the central United States and southern Canada and haul them several hundred miles further north. We can't. And even if we could physically, we can't take the complex web of organisms that's found within that soil so that we can grow grains. Because you plant a seed, and 10 years later you have a tree that's this tall, and you think it's all because of the tree. It's all because of the seed. The seed had almost nothing to do with it. The seed was necessary but insufficient to produce the tree. What is sufficient? Habitat. What does that mean? It means a certain temperature regime. It means a certain watering regime. It means a bunch of nutrients that the seed is tapping into with its roots. How does it get them? Mostly through other organisms, through mycorrhizae that attach to those roots and expand the harvesting range of those roots. Bottom line, we can't just shift from one place to another. Evolution over generations, hundreds or thousands of generations, explains why plants are found where they're found, and animals too. And we just can't move the climate around and expect that everybody's going to work it out. It doesn't work that way. So the very slight increase in global average temperature at this point destroys civilization because it destroys the ability to grow grains. And people tell me all the time, yeah, but I don't need grains. Well, of course you don't. But we need grains to maintain this set of living arrangements. If we don't have bread at the grocery store for 4 days in a row, people are not going to be happy. A lot of people are already not very happy because we're in the age of economic contraction. So they're already not happy. Imagine when the cheap food and the cheap beer and the cheap television stop showing up. People can be very unpleasant if they haven't been drinking enough. We can edit this, right? It's already out there.
Leave in the good line.
Anything else out there in the ether?
Someone wants to know if we'll have another OMR workshop.
Will we have another OLR workshop, Only Love Remains workshop? Yes, we will, if you would like. As with my work here, I depend upon the kindness of strangers. I depend upon this woman here to give me a roof to lay my head and a pillow to lay my head upon and to feed me. It takes money to get me places. I haven't made any money since May of 2009, and I've been spending it like it's going out of style. So I got nothing left. I depend upon the kindness of my hosts and the people they work with to get me here, and the same applies to the workshop. Yes, we'll do it anywhere, pretty much any time, as you wish. I'll hang around as long as people want until they throw us out of here. And thank you very, very much for coming. I greatly appreciate your interaction.